Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Open Concept Podcast, where we are breaking down unnecessary walls and barriers that stand in the way of greatness. Our guest today, Mr. Justin Lund, straight out of Utah, here to chat with us today. Multi-nine-figure entrepreneur, multi-exit extraordinaire. I don't know if I can call you extraordinaire. You can self-proclaimed.
I'd go that far. I don't think I'd go that far. But.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Well, we were talking a little bit offline. You sort of made the comment. It's like it sounds pretty cool when you introduce somebody like that, but you kind of like there's the good stuff, but there's also some of the bad stuff that comes along with it. Mm-hmm. But why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, Mr. Justin Lund?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brandon. So I started. I've always had an entrepreneurial streak. I think that started as a young child. My brother bought Tony Robbins tapes when they were actual tapes in the 80s. And it was $300, I think, back then, which is like 14 grand today. So it was a lot. And he let me listen to him as a 7 or 8 year old. And I just thought it was the neatest thing ever. And so I like the idea of this guy flying in helicopter to events and getting people all fired up. And I thought, I want to be my own boss and do stuff like that. That'd be cool, man. So the seed was planted early, I think, but I went through some challenges and got married young. And to put food on the table and to care for a young family, I got a job in sales, which I liked because I liked that psychology and kind of using that. But the environment was kind of toxic. I got into some drug use and abuse and went to rehab, which was another great chapter of learning more about my psychology. This time all about me. Learning really what makes me tick. And then from there, got out with maybe not a chip on my shoulder, but really something to prove. I wanted to show society, my family, that I wasn't totally worthless. So I went all in on a business and sleeping on my mom's floor for about a year with a wife and 2 kids now at the time was not a great situation. But that's when I started stacking one brick on top of the next and figuring out.
Wait, what year was this?
2005-ish.
2005.
Yeah. Yep. So I had a good run over the next 5 years, grew that into quite an enterprise of 100 employees, did just about 9 figures. So not quite 9 figures, but was right there, right in the cusp. But part of that was, as I was growing, I ran into this point where I was a solopreneur for a while. I was doing well. I paid off some debts and kind of reestablished that I wasn't just a useless, guy hooked on drugs. And I reached kind of a crossroad where I thought, okay, I'm going to dial back now. I've grown. I'm working 20 hours a day sometimes, like really just burning the candle at every end possible. And I called some clients and said, I think I'm going to scale back just a little bit. And they all unanimously said, well, then you're fired. So I thought, okay, no, just kidding. Wait, hold on. Let me get back to you on that. I realized I knew I couldn't keep going the same way that I was going because that was burnout. I mean, I was starting to feel it already. I was doing books on Sunday. I was working every single day of the week, a lot.
This was still about 5 years into the business?
No, that was 2006. That was a year and a half.
Yeah.
I was starting to see. I was approaching 7 figures of revenue. I was right in that realm. And that's when I started thinking, man, I'm going to do $1 million. I'm going to make a couple $100,000 profit. I could dial back some of my involvement, make a handsome living, and have very little expenses, So this could be a good gig for me to just run on my own.
Sounds appealing.
That's before I really knew how to dream a bigger dream too. So that was kind of part of it. But they forced my hand. And so I was like, I got to grow or I'm going to start to die. It was one or the other. And it was a very clear choice. So that's when I knew I needed help. I knew I needed to bring people in. And that's what scared me. I don't know how to hire people. I don't know how to deal with HR stuff. I don't know how to do taxes and payroll withholdings and yikes. So I just let that kind of stuff just scare me. And that opened the door for some people with bad intent to come into my life. So the short version of the story is over the next 5 years, growing all this revenue also brought in some bad characters who took all that revenue, and tens of millions of dollars was siphoned out on the company.
That's a part of the story that we can either choose to skim quickly over, or we can dive into that a little
Either
bit,
way.
which would be my preference.
Okay.
I'd like
Yeah. And then,
sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
finish your thought.
Well, I was just going to mention that from that stemmed a whole series of problems because my approach of, naturally, but my approach to these complex issues that kind of frightened me was nothing really more than a head in the sand. I was like, okay, I'm going to just pretend that doesn't exist. Let these guys kind of take care of it. And I'll just keep going and making it rain. I'm the rainmaker. I can make money. I can strike up new deals and land new accounts and contracts and all these things. And I was traveling a lot, and I was doing these things that ultimately part of the bad side of the story is there were some tax issues. The taxes weren't paid because the taxes were dramatically underreported. There was more money to take out of the companies. So there were grossly understated taxes. And I started to put those pieces together. And then I spent the next 4.5 years, so almost as much time as building the business, fighting my way out of that tax liability and trying to relitigate, literally, and putting together like the day events of the previous 5-6 years in court, in a court proceeding, at least multiple court proceedings.
Yeah, that's wildly painful. Let me ask you: you were in. Let's go back to rehab, because you were there, and it seems like that was a bit of a pivotal moment for you. And you said that was where you did some searching and you found some purpose, and you reflected on really what made you tick. What was the exercises that were going on in your mind? You said you were hooked on drugs. Somebody, was it a family member that checked into rehab? Was it yourself? You had hit a kind of rock bottom and decided to do that yourself, or how did you end up in rehab?
Yeah, so I was hooked on pain-killing pills. And then I went to the street equivalents of, opiates, things like that, which is, oh man, the worst. Like physiologically, the physical addiction that your body gets to those kinds of substances is just tremendous. I tried about a dozen times or more to white knuckle through quitting. I would try to even organized times I could try to get my wife and kids out of the house. Like, yeah, go see your aunt. Yeah, go visit. Because then I could have 3 or 4 days to go through the worst of these kind of withdrawals. And, the sweats, just terrible physical pain. And I did that again and again and again. But then my wife was coming home and I couldn't look like that. So all of this was I kept the facade up to her. She had no idea. I was lying right.
Family didn't know that you were hooked on pills. It was something that you kept to yourself.
Yep. So I had to keep it that way because I was trying to keep, in my mind, I had to keep it that way because that was the facade that I was living. I'm getting up, going to church, taking my 2 cute little kids and trying to live the life and live in a house that I couldn't afford that was double mortgaged. And, the whole thing, robbing Peter to pay Paul and then vice versa. And then getting just the whole thing with the addiction.
At that time, did you feel that you had things under control, or did you know that things were spiraling out of control and you just didn't know how to deal with it?
That's a great question, and not one that I've been asked. I definitely had a sense of control for a long time. In sales, I was in high ticket sales before high ticket sales were even a thing that was cool. I mean, I don't know if the name Russ Whitney rings a bell. He was a real estate investor from Florida, and he had a coaching program, one of the first, like this is way back. And we were selling, literally, this is way back in the 90s. We're selling $100,000 packages to people for coaching and events and going in joint ventures on real estate projects and different things. And I'm just some knucklehead kid on drugs making these sales. But I was good at it, and I could pull in $6, 7, $8,000 if I got the leads. It was all based on the lead structure. If I had the
Yeah.
leads, I could bring in $8,000 in a week. So it was tough to string together week to week to week, especially as an addict, because an $8,000 paycheck, and I'm like, that's enough
Yeah.
money.
There's
to
some money
pay
in the
some
bank.
bills and do a whole bunch of fun stuff with that. So that helped me to maintain a false sense of control for a long time, because I could have these landmark, these big weeks of pay that just made everything kind of seem okay, where I could keep it together, so to speak.
Some of the top sales guys I know, they can relate sales to addiction. Because you get that same hit of dopamine when you make that sale, when you close that sale, when you get that paycheck, that's coming, as you do from a quick hit from something you're going to get off the street.
But there's the other side of that too, Brandon, that you can look at the rejection that you get. It often fuels these addictions, because getting rejected again and again and going through that part of the sales process can sometimes be a sucker punch in the gut, and so that's why a lot of guys and gals in that space you'll find that behavior is prevalent because of that, some of those tendencies.
Yeah, and if you're not used and you can't handle that rejection really well and compartmentalize that, you're going to look for something. You're going to look for a win, whether it's if it's not, you're not going to find it in making a sale, and you're not going to find it in business, and you're going to find it in a way that that you can get it and it's in your control.
For sure. And I started in my 21, 22, 23. I'm not the most developed and advanced in cognitive abilities at the time. So some of those easy releases came, just without thought, and it seemed harmless enough until you're fully hooked on this, and then you realize you're losing control. And that's why the attempts of trying to get my wife out of the house, get the family out so I could go through this process, realizing that you can't just not do it. I mean, it would be as clear, as plain as day. You would see the change in the physical change from what you see me look like now. That if I were going through something like that and then didn't have it, it's a bad change that you would be witnessing.
So back to my question, when you were in rehab there, what was it that you were going through that allowed this time that you to get out of rehab and get clean? Was it the one time that you went into rehab that things ended up getting better, or was it?
It was the one time. Never done drugs since, and that
Man, that's
that experience. Thank you. Yeah. That experience, it was compelled because and that's part of the story that I was getting to. As I began to lose more and more control, I ran into problems with the law because I just couldn't keep the image up. And so I started to just be in the energy of, really bad energy and exhibiting this addiction. And my opportunities for employment began to shrink. And so all these things kind of just compounded and piled up. I was arrested, went to jail 2 times in as many months, and with charges of controlled substances. So that was kind of like a Hail Mary that if you go to rehab and you're perfect after rehab, maybe we can push this court proceeding out on these 2 different charges, like sets of charges that you've racked up now. And hopefully you don't go to prison for very long. So I'm looking at my 1-year-old and my 3-year-old saying, not go to prison very long. Like, that's not doable. I got to make this work. So I called on God's grace and I asked for a miracle. And then I went into rehab, and I remember the first day that I'm sitting around this group. I'm terrified out of my mind, just couldn't. The idea of rehab before going into rehab as an addict, it was just like, there's no way. It's not, my life will fall apart. My family will leave me. I have to be out here controlling and like manipulating all of these situations in order to keep everything alive. So going in there on that first day was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. And probably still to this date, that was the most scared that I ever was. That's interesting to think about because I've gone up against some things. But the first group, the first day, I was just like, fuck this. If I'm going to be able to quit, it's going to be in a place like this where I'm surrounded by doctors. And so I got up. There was an old man named Dr. Bob that was a great doctor. He pushed my buttons. He just got in my, he got in my face, and he did all the right things to help me. And I went to introduce myself, and he's like, "Tell us about yourself." I'm like, "Oh, I'm Justin. I'm this. I'm this." And he's like, "Yeah, enough of that shit. Tell me the real, like, who you are." And he did that like 3 or 4 times, and it just kind of made me mad. And that's where I'm like, "I can't quit. I've tried this so many times on my own." And he's like, "Okay, finally. Why didn't you just say that the first time?" And then he went on, like, it's like he just pierced my soul, and then he just goes on to the next guy, and
Yeah.
I'm like, "Whoa, this is crazy." And that was a point where I'm like, I just went in emotionally and mentally, like, I'm here. I have to be here. I'm scared out of my mind, but I know I don't want that version of my life anymore. So if there's a chance, and I don't know that there is, but if there is, a place like this is the only possible option that I have left. So I went all in, and I'm like, teach me. I want it out. I want to learn. I want the most of this experience. And I just went like full send mode.
Man, that's I had a Dr. Bob in my life. He was my my high school counselor. He didn't quite pierce my soul the way that your Dr. Bob did, but I still remember Dr. Bob in my life. And that was and you're in rehab here. I mean, because a lot of people they get into rehab and it's sort of multiple times, right? They're in and out of rehab because they never find that driving factor. You mentioned your kids were at home. Was that the biggest driving factor for you at that point to make sure that you succeeded?
It was, and it was all these failed attempts, and it was, again, Dr. Bob. I would say things, in subsequent little group meetings and different things where I'd be like, "Well, I'm a good dad," and he's like, "Bullshit. You're a terrible dad. How many times did you leave your kids in the other room to go do heroin in a different room? That's not a good dad." I'm like, whoa, and
it's just not.
Yeah. But at the time, you think I love my kids. I would do anything for them, but what would I? But I wouldn't stop doing drugs for them.
Quit heroin.
But I couldn't. So those driving moments, it was really just. Yeah, I tried so many things at that point, and I really wanted to be rid of the cycles that I had gone through, but I didn't have the tools. And so here I am in this place where there's probably a dozen different doctors and counselors coming in and doing different, like they each had kind of their little modalities or specialties. And each one of them, I was just able to draw something from and work through things. And I just didn't have a desire. There was a desire and a curiosity. There was part of me that's like, I don't even know if it's possible. I've done so much shit that I tried on my own and without success. Like, maybe it's not possible. Maybe I'm just screwed. But then I started to get some momentum, and once you get through the first couple weeks of that physiological withdrawal, your brain fog starts to remove, and you start feeling better, and you start like, the chemistry of your mind and your brain starts to readjust and starts to reset, and you start to feel these endorphins come back that only came from drugs before. Now you're getting some natural, like the way it's supposed to be, and it feels so fresh that you sleep again naturally. These things that just happen to most normal people, like it started happening to me again, and I just started feeling like, okay, I can do this, and I had people helping me to do this. And the driver was my kids, for sure. That's a big motivator. I didn't want to go to prison. I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to split up our family. I wanted them to have a dad all the time. But there was one moment, again, Dr. Bob in his group, that I said something like, I don't remember the exact quote, something like, "I'll flip burgers at McDonald's if I have to when I get out of here, just so I can be with my family." And he throws his pen down and he's like, "Well, you're a dumb motherfucker then. And if you're and I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "If you haven't learned enough about yourself yet, then you're going to be back here in 2 weeks because you'll leave, go do some dumbass, meaningless job to you, something that doesn't fulfill you, something that doesn't speak to who you actually are. And then guess what? You're going to feel a little empty inside." Oh, you have a good coping mechanism for when you feel empty inside. And you know what it is? Yeah, exactly. And I was like, wow. Like, so Brandon, these kinds of systems that I didn't know, I guess I did know. I mean, I read Tony Robbins, he talks about stuff like this, but this was applied to me specifically and individually at a key point in my development, like 25 years old.
Yeah, key point in your life.
Like it was right there when I needed it. Wait, I can get a stimulus. I can pause, and then I can decide the response. This is revolutionary. I didn't know I had this ability. I just thought you react. And it began this systems framework thinking that began to take hold that I then used as I started to build a business. But it was key moments like that that really began to shape the trajectory, the hope, the belief, and just the knowledge that it gave me the staying power, by the way, to sleep on my mom's floor for a year, even though my wife and my whole family, like that was even harder than rehab, like being in that place and not giving up on a business that I had a dream that I could build to just go get a job that made enough money to at least pay for an apartment, but I knew that's what got me into rehab in the first place. So it was from the training in rehab that taught me that and gave me the resilience and the tools to fight through the next year and a half of sitting in the garage on a computer and being freezing cold and trying to just, to build something on my own, even though everybody in my life felt like they hated me because I was just not very, I wasn't contributing much to things then.
Everybody in your life, I think, appreciates the pain that you went through and just how violent you had to be with yourself to become who you are today.
Yeah. Now in hindsight, it's interesting to look back on this story. At the time, obviously it was challenging. Young marriage, young kids, pregnancy kind of sped up that marriage plan. So, those things, just that situation. But the fact that I'm still married to the same woman, she stood by me through all that. Wow.
Hell yeah.
She's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story. You get out of rehab and you're sitting in your computer. You ramp up your business over the next 5 years, you said, to about 100 employees.
Mm-hmm.
Can you run us through what ramping up to 100 employees, walk us through the business model and what that took to get to 100 employees in 5 years? Because that's in 5 years. I mean, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. Let's see. We started. The main thing was keeping the main thing. Actually, like we did one thing and we did it really well, and that over the course of the first 3 or so years started to create 7 and then 8 figures revenue, which really opened the doors to a lot of possibilities. That gave us a reputation in the marketplace. That gave, I was really good at saying no to opportunities at that time because they would come at us all day long. And that was, it was kind of fun and cool. And some of my employees called me the dream crusher because they'd say, "Oh, I got a new idea." I'm like, no. The distraction. We're not going to do that. That's a distraction. But we did end up trying a dozen plus different businesses over the course of those latter part of those 5 years. Some of which brought in a couple $1,000,000, some of which totally lost money, some of which brought in a couple $100,000. So they were all good things. I had really good employees. I had good people to help me build things, but we went from doing a key, just like a brokering. We were just providing brokerage service when marketing on the internet was taking off. There's no Instagram. Facebook is brand new. Google AdWords, all this stuff is new back in those days. And so we were brokering between people who had products and services to sell and these publishers that knew how to bring people in, whether it's an email list or they knew how to buy display ad inventory, or they're good at PPC with Google, or they're good with this new Facebook platform that's just coming out and rolling out a whole advertising platform. So we managed these relationships, and I recognized in that these people that buy the ads and spend the money on Facebook or wherever it was, and then these people over here selling widgets, whatever those were, they didn't really care or know about one another's business. Mm. So I thought, I recognize this little space here in between. I thought, well, they don't know what it's like to manage all the customer service and to develop the products, and they don't know what it's like to spend $100,000 a day in media if a server goes down. They don't care because they're paying. So I just became this go-between. I managed the relationship. I learned just enough about both businesses that I could speak to each one. And then I flew around the world just making these connections and keeping those relationships solid. And I manage the money part of it too. So you pay for the advertising, I bring it in, I pay for the people that are bringing the traffic to your sites, and you keep a little exchange there in the middle. And then that turned into a technology company and a hosting company because there was just more needs. And then it turned into a design and a branding agency because there was more needs there for people that wanted to sell stuff but didn't have that component. And that's how it grew.
Say flying around a lot. There also wasn't Zoom and different
No.
versions. I think Skype was out. I don't know when that
Yeah.
was, but I remember 2008 using Skype when I was traveling and was going around and trying to connect with family. But you buy the SIM card, or you go into the internet cafe and you use Skype, and it was very choppy and whatever. But
Totally.
yeah, so you kind of had to jump on the plane, get around, harness those relationships.
I still prefer that when I can anyway, if I'm doing those kinds of things, because it's just the connection that I can get with those people and create a relationship that was real and know and get, Zoom and all, and what we're doing right now is fantastic. But if I could come and hang out and we can go to the gym together and we go to dinner together and then we, get up tomorrow and have a couple meetings in the morning together, like there's a different connection that we're going to have that I think this virtual doesn't quite bridge that gap. Although it's great and I love using it. It saves a lot of time and miles and energy. But that was kind of my MO. I'd spent a lot of time with clients and with vendors, and so they knew that I knew about their business because I was inside of their business. I was at their location. I knew what the struggles were. I knew their team. I knew what their team was struggling with. And so those were some of the gaps that I could fill that kept those relationships strong and that gave us the platform to bring in that kind of revenue.
I got to say, I agree with that. There's stuff that you only know when you're able to walk the floor of a company and understand the front line, whoever's working there, the CEO, the CMO, or whoever that is that you're talking about, see how they interact with each other so that you can really understand the inner workings of a company. But if you're talking you're selling to one, whether it's going to be one CFO or the second or the third in command, you're kind of going to get a very small view and understanding of the organization.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. I still very much to this day, right? I think that's one thing as an entrepreneur, people may struggle with, and I certainly know that as myself, right? Is the idea of all right, well, how involved am I going to get with understanding what's going on in the front line versus staying a few degrees separated and letting the people do their, do what it is that they're doing. Yeah. You've hired them to do this thing. You're trusting that they're making the right decisions. You don't want to get in the way, but you also kind of want to be able to jump in, to get some feedback, to see how things are going and gather information yourself so that you can make whatever decisions that you need to make and make sure that is in fact the reality.
Absolutely. It makes me think of, your question was about how did you get up to 100 employees and these high numbers of revenue? And, that there was a lot of growth that took place and we were growing very quickly. I had a lot of good people to help me. But I remember a meeting that I had with it was like an all hands meeting, and we're talking through things, and I'm doing this because I'm just like, oh man. And I had an assistant at the time that was very, very capable. And that assistant at the end of the meeting, I think the meeting went on for 90 minutes. And I was just kind of I'm getting a headache from this. This is not good. At the end, he calculated for me how much that meeting cost me with everybody that was in the room. And I was like, you're freaking kidding me.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew how much payroll was, but he broke it down. He's like, well, this took this many minutes and it was this long and this is the payroll and this is divided by this. And he had it all broken down. He's just a whiz with spreadsheets. He's like, that's how much the meeting was. I'm like, I want to kill everyone. I mean, that is insane. And so that's when some of these systems, even from rehab, some of these systems mindsets started to come back to me there's a better way for this. There's a better I've allowed this to grow into something that is just kind of chaotic. And so we shrunk the team by 25%. We put in higher level people that had direct reports. And we started creating a lot of playbooks based on, we had a handful of people that had been there for a few years, but then we just kind of went down to go back up and we came up quite a bit higher, quite a bit faster, and hit a whole nother level because just structure, having each department had a manager, and the manager had no more than 8 direct reports, and each of those had a playbook for daily sync meetings and for different things that they would do to ensure some continuity, some consistency, some scalability, and just so little things. I remember once a server went down, and it went down at like 4 o'clock in the morning. Nobody saw it until they got up at about 6:30, 6:40. So it was 2 hours ish, 2.5, something like that. And it was $287,000 of lost commissions and marketing dollars paid. So this is that disconnect that we had between advertisers wanted to pay for, they want to sell this, so they'll pay advertising. But if traffic's not coming to their site, they're not paying for anything. They're not, that's, so we had the server in between when we set up the technology part of it later on in the picture. But we had no redundancies because we didn't have a playbook. We had a couple of guys. They ran it. But when the couple of guys are all asleep at the same time, which that's normal, then nobody saw it until later. So we had to pay for the advertising dollars nevertheless, and there was zero revenue that came in. So $287,000 tuition payment for that lesson learned. So that teaches you quick that
it's an expensive university right there.
Yeah. And this was before AWS and Google Cloud and all these. Now you can set it up and just be like, I want all this redundancy. And it does it automatically for you. Those days, we spent over the next few months $500,000 buying the hardware to build the redundancies and the notification system so that when it went down, a series of bells and whistles would go off and a whole bunch of people got notified of the problem. So we could jump on it quickly before anybody recognized it, solve problems, reroute traffic, send it elsewhere, do all these things to just avoid catastrophes.
What did the business start to look like after that lesson then? Because I imagine that was a big learning lesson and you had to change things pretty quickly.
Yeah.
What did that start to look like?
It was, again, they were about the same time. It was a lot more automation and redundancies. So instead of just, I think before that, Brandon, it was more about, we had a half a dozen of us that came in early on after that first initial growth phase. I went and recruited a half a dozen guys that could come and work in, that we had good relationships. We got along well together. A few of them were my childhood friends that I knew from like 2 years old, so we had a lot of good chemistry. And we didn't really need a lot of playbooks because we were it's that founder's circle. Like it was really tight knit.
Yeah. I know that well.
But now we were at 60, 70 employees, and we have a $300,000 problem that happened in 2 hours, before anybody woke up. And that was just a sounding bell, an alarm to say, we have to know what's going on. We have to have triggers. So one of the guys there at the time, my buddy from childhood, he wrote a program that pings these servers every 10 seconds. And if it comes back failure, 15 people get a text message. So that was our first SOP. It wasn't pretty, but when those text messages got off, we all jumped up and we made sure our phones rang in the middle of the night if that was what's coming in. And so he would write a program to do that. And then we turned that in. That was our stopgap measure. And then it became, what now can we do for redundancies? Because even if it went down, somebody still had to jump in there and figure out how to reboot it. Why is it down? Is it a power outage? Is it, and troubleshoot and do triage. Then the next version of that was the notifications plus a backup. And then backups with notifications, with split routes of all this different traffic going different places. And it became this complex machine. I remember him coming into my office and carrying a whiteboard 6 feet. And he's like, okay, I got a plan. I'm like, what the hell are you doing?
What are we even talking about here?
And he's got all these circles and all these layers. And he's like, okay, we can have servers here, 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 here. And I'm like, okay, I lost you after the first sentence, but it looks awesome. Let's rock. And it worked. We got better and better at doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. The thing about systems is you can, especially as you're building your business, you often implement new systems, but you don't audit the old ones. And then all of a sudden you're trying to weave new operating procedures into old operating procedures. And you have to take a look, or somebody gets pissed off because they say, this guy isn't following this procedure. And you're like, we're not even in the same business anymore. We're not doing
Yeah.
that anymore. That
Yeah.
that operation procedure is kind of redundant. Like, do we
Mhm.
even need that? But then you start webbing these complex, layers. And I love automation as well. But we had a scenario where we were looking at just getting a system in place for project managers to review and check invoices. And it was like, cool. Well, the financial controller is going to put an invoice into a folder, and then that's going to notify somebody else, and then that's going to end up going into a spreadsheet, and that's going to notify the team on Slack, and that's going to,
Mhm.
everything else. And so like the technology is out there, but at some
Yeah.
point it becomes really complex, and you start stacking stuff up and up and on. And I talk to so many business owners where I'm like, hey, cool, show me, like, let's talk about the playbook. But it is a spreadsheet empire, right? Or Google
Mhm.
sheet empire.
Yeah.
And I think it's a rite of passage for a lot of entrepreneurs, is to
Mhm.
have that Google sheet empire. But at some point, there's a system that's going to break, and it's really difficult to stay on top of the procedures that you have. So
For
they do
sure.
need to be continuously audited,
You
especially as you're going to be growing. The systems are going to
big
break.
time.
You're going to have
And
to break those systems.
I would say that the one of the keys is don't it's easy to start focusing on the complexity and adding these sophistications and automations before that's often done prematurely, right? I see people doing that all the time. They're building just for the sake of the idea sounding good when even basically, I mentioned this to our team today. We're putting things in Google Drive file folder locations, and we have a key that kind of outlines like this is where stuff goes. And there's a tendency to go into a root folder, which there's only 8 of, and then create a sub and a sub and a subfolder. I'm like, nobody can find that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the whole root folder on its own only has 11 files in it. We don't need 16 subfolders of that root. So put it in there, but that's the tendency because we think, oh, this is going to make it more intuitive. This is going to make it more sophisticated. This is going to be better. When in reality, sometimes we're building this sophistication and all we're really building is complexity. So I would say test things first. But as I started going through those phases, year 4, 3, 4, what was a real game changer is learning the lesson of having those direct reports, having putting people in, as we grew, there was just this big quagmire, and I was having team meetings with 60, 70 people at a time until I realized how much they cost me. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, no more. That's a waste. Because they pissed me off, and it's cost me a fortune to sit there and talk to people asking what I thought sometimes were dumb questions. By bringing in like levels to the process and having a manager whose job was primarily just managing the 8 direct reports under them, well, they could then audit some of those systems. That was part of their SOP. You look at the systems we put in place for the last 6 months and see what's relevant and see what's old. Because the engineers, the frontline guys, they don't have time for that. They're building stuff, they're developing things. But there needs to be something between the top and the engineers because we got all this space to cover here. And it turns out, and sometimes there was 2 or 3 levels, but there's always a level when you got 5 or 6 guys or gals down here building, and then you got the C-level management up here. There needs to be somebody in between who is inspecting that. Otherwise, you get what you just described. You get all these old systems, you get confusion, you get, well, I thought he was doing it. She said that she'd take care of it. And you don't have the continuity or the congruity to everything. And you got spreadsheets coming at your wazoo.
If everybody's accountable for everything, then nobody's accountable to anything.
Bingo. Right.
Right.
Yep. So that change in our structure allowed us to really level up and gave us so much more throughput. It seemed like a big expense because these middle level kind of managers, they weren't cheap people. They needed, we brought people in with experience. And so it seemed like a real big line item addition to our payroll. But the throughput that we got as a result of it and the efficiency, no longer were there 80, 90 person meetings. There would be little pods. There would be a meeting here, a meeting here. And once, like, our meetings were more about goodwill. It's like, let's all get together after work and have a barbecue and like get to know each other and have fun, not sit around a meeting and want to stab pencils into our eyes and stuff because everybody's just quarreling with everybody else. So that change really brought us into a whole new level and took us from 8 figures of sometimes profitable, sometimes not profitable, to a whole new level, blasting off.
Let me talk to you about that, or ask you about the quarreling between departments or quarreling
Sure.
between people. How do you identify in your organization? Because you're talking about a lot of people, right? And there's no doubt that there's going to be some level of HR that you're going to have to, you're going to have to deal with at some
Hmm.
point. Somebody's, whether you have an HR department or you as the owner, often ends up as you're building, you end up having to you're wearing the HR
You're
hat,
right.
and so you're taking
Yeah.
care of stuff, right? So how do you define, like, when you're talking about team synergy and you're sort of growing at that speed, at that speed? If there is a quarrel in between the staff, right? What does that process look like to decide who is in the right, who is in the wrong?
Hmm.
Can we move forward? Is this a people problem? Is this a process problem? In your mind, or in your experience, what does that look like from that HR side? Because like, not everybody is going to play nice with everybody, and
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
There's often going to be tension as long as everybody's sort of working towards the same
Hmm.
goal, right? And often different opinions are going to move things faster, and they're going to shape different perspective. But if you have different departments that are talking to each other and there's clearly a communication breakdown, one department doesn't like this, or you're dealing with an interpersonal scenario where maybe you have a C-level executive, and their direct report, they're not necessarily seeing eye to eye, or they're
Hmm.
having issues with each other. How do you decide whether or not one person is right, one person is wrong? Is it totally situational? Well, what would your process be to manage that, to get people realigned if they're not aligned on the same team?
Yeah, I think it's mostly situational. You've got to see what context is going on, but that doesn't mean that there's not principles that you can bring to bear in those eh, within that arena to help you govern those kinds of things. And I would start by saying, if you see red flags, take them for what they are and listen to them. Right? We were talking about that before
Yeah, we're
here.
talking about that offline. Red
Yeah,
flags
like
don't go down.
there've been times that I have seen the red flags, and as an entrepreneur, we try to put lipstick on pigs, right? We try to solve problems. We look at things and say, I can make it work. I don't do that with people. If you see a red flag with people, chances are they're going to burn you later. It's a sign. Honor it, listen to it, go with it, and don't discount it, or do so at your own peril. That would be where I would start. Next, and again, situational. Some of the big conflicts that I remember in the development, like software development, we'd have different camps of people. They were good at their niche, their language, and they would always fight for. Use fight. They would always want to stay within their lane. They would want to, or the technology that they were the most interested in. That's their position that they would take. And so there was at one point we had like 40 developers, I think, working there, and it was like there was 40 opinions, and they're all using different acronyms, none of which I knew, and it would just drive me nuts. And so how to get through that? That's harder when you don't know how. So again, that's that middle level. You need somebody who has an understanding of the general, like what is the goal, what are we doing, and have the direct reports so that they can have information from the front line, from the engineers building things. We need to know how to build, but you've got to have some guiding principles as an organization that you're not building just to build. You're building for an outcome. I once had a really great designer who worked for us, and his work was fantastic. He would design things. He was very slow, very meticulous. Hand created a logo that we used for years that I had people just randomly stop me and be like, "Oh, you had that logo that." I was like, "Whoa, yeah. How did you? Who are you?" It blew my mind that they would remember that. But he also wouldn't compromise his artistic values for the sake of building what worked. So he'd get data back saying his design isn't converting. His design, customers don't like his design, but because in his mind, he followed the right artistic principles, he would not compromise. And so those are tough. Those are tougher, like in his case, he wasn't able to advance. And, there was other people that came in that were junior designers, and they were like, "Hey, man, I'll just do what works. Like if this works," because we had this rapid feedback system where we were
Yeah.
testing things within the marketplace. We'd get data back right away, and we'd immediately change and try to go with what works. And that kind of is what our distinguishing trait was in the market. So those were other conflicts that we had to deal with. I don't know that there's a blanket answer to the question, but Yeah, those are things that, by honoring the red flags and being aware of what those big things are, not discounting them or sweeping them under the rug, because we've had those that have just they bite you. They bite you
And I
100% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get it. And it's often as a business owner or an employee of a company or anybody, right? If you're dealing with any sort of situation in your world, you try and gather the information that you can. Sometimes it's very, very black and white. Sometimes there's a number of nuances that need to be understood before you make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you need to make a decision slowly and methodically, and sometimes you need to make it really, really fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you make it really, really fast, then you need to understand it may be the right decision, maybe the wrong decision, but you just need to be okay with the decision that you've made and move on.
For sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And sometimes trying to make them slowly and we want, if we want all the answers, that can be a crippling trait in and of itself too. So you've got to be able to, and as an entrepreneur, like if you know how to solve problems, like I said, and that's the thing. You got to rely on that as a key tenet of what you're doing, but you also need to recognize that there's a thermostat that you're probably operating within, and there's a level down here that's low that you wouldn't accept anything lower, but then there's a level up here that requires you to be a little bit more than you've ever been before, and it's usually between these two that most people live. And there's a way to break through that ceiling, but it's not hustling harder, working more. It's changing things. Like maybe it could be your decision-making process, like you just said. Typically I'll talk to people that they're like, well, this is how I make a decision. I get this and I sleep on it and I wait for a week and I see that it's like, okay, that probably works. That served you in the past, but to go to the next one, that might be one of the things that you need to evaluate, because there could be opportunities that pass you by. And in all that time that you're taking to evaluate this decision, what you're really doing is building a case to stay comfortable. And you gotta, that's the kind of stuff that's hard to get in your own head and pluck out of there and really inspect, So there's some frameworks and there's some methods for doing that you learn in rehab to try to stay self-aware. But it's also good to have some outsiders' input, to have a coach, to have.
I like the way you put that, right? You're building a case to stay comfortable. And I think that's what a lot of people end up doing is they find a just way of not making a decision that might need to be made to stay comfortable without ruffling feathers that probably need to be ruffled a bit.
Absolutely. And I mean, you look at that example. It's the very definition. That's a comfort zone. And comfort zone means not doing things that are going to make you uncomfortable. So a lot of people feel this sense of discomfort. And when they feel that approaching and they can kind of feel it coming on, many use that as a signal and they turn around and they're like, okay, that's enough. And I would argue it's just the opposite. That's a sign that you're going to push through. So have a little bit of faith in yourself. Know that if you're an entrepreneur, you're a builder, you're somebody that's out there solving problems, you've done it a million times before. So instead of just staying in the comfort zone problems, lean into the one that gives you discomfort. And maybe that's the actual sign that you're on the right path. And if you go through it instead of avoiding and staying back here in the safe zone, you'll find yourself at a whole new level with a whole new set of problems to solve that might be really rewarding, both personally, internally, and even financially.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, right? A lot of people they have when they feel difficult conversation, whether it's difficult conversations or difficult scenarios pop up, they're either going to have a tendency to double down their efforts and run through those problems, or they're going to say, I just don't want to deal with this right now, and find some way and justify in their head that everything is still okay.
And that's the default, right, Brandon?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Humans want to keep things known. We want to keep things familiar. Our subconscious wants us to stay safe from the days when there were saber-toothed tigers chasing us around. We scan the landscape for threats. But now we need, if we're going to evolve and we're going to take ourselves to a new level, whether it's our business or our relationships or our life, whatever, fill in the blank. We've got to be able to scan the landscape and shut off the default mechanism, which is just designed for familiarity, for safety, and say, no, wait, that's the way I used to be. And just because it's the way it's been does not mean that's the way it should always be. I should answer that question myself. Like, do I want to have something different? Do I want to go to another level? Do I want to achieve more? Do I want to take this relationship to the next level or whatever? But leaning in, it's going to feel, there's going to be some discomfort with that process.
Yeah. Yeah. So we move forward after the business. We're sort of 5 years down the business, 100 employees. Is that the point where we exited? We sold the business at that point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was an exit with some of our subsidiaries and smaller companies. And it was also the same time that the financial landscape of America and the world began to change in
2008.
Yeah. 2008. We held it together through 2010. But that's when I had some of the characters that entered my life that got a little more aggressive with the money grabs and with what wasn't. So we sold some of the assets of some companies. And as I mentioned, we had kind of our core, then we had some subsidiaries that we had put together that were supports unto that were kind of opportunities created from our main core business. And that's one thing that I wanted to clarify and mention, because it's an important lesson that I learned that I'd like to share. A lot of people think about diversity. A lot of people think, I'm gonna don't want all my eggs in one basket. But I've even done this. I've even done this in the last few years, to be honest. Like, success, every success that you look at, my own life, anybody else's life that you've seen, any remarkable success story, they get there doing one thing. And that one thing creates opportunities for them to then diversify with the capital that the one thing created. When in reality, a lot of people think they're going to go do this, 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 and this, and have all these multiple streams of income and diversity and all this. And they're doing 10 things half-assed or mid or, not that great.
100 things at 10% versus
one
thing at 100%.
100. So we were able to get out of some of those smaller things and package something up there. But then that's when the door started to collapse. Like, the door started to slam shut. We had a couple clients that entered into bankruptcy protection, and we had some different lawsuits that started to take place. There was banks collapsing left and right. Every other week there was news of that going on. And that's when I had somebody just that there was a little, we pared down, scaled down, kept things going. But all the cash reserves at that point were just kind of swept out, and the end result that I don't even actually know what the end result was, because there was hundreds of entities that they had set up that were just used for siphoning a little here, a little there over the course of all these years. But it really ramped up there at the end when it looked like, okay, the music might stop and there might be no chairs left to sit in. So there was a big grab to just take all the money that was left. Millions of dollars just wiped out of accounts.
It was a wild time. I remember I was at that point, it was 2000, I guess it was 2009. And I was working for a large construction company at the time. It was a company I started working with when I got into construction out of high school. And I was working with them for a number of years, but it was 2009 and we had maybe getting close to, I think it was about 2009. Anyways, we're building the parkade, and we're building a hotel on top of the parkade. We get to the top of the parkade, and I'm surveying at this point, right? So I'm working as an apprentice, and I have a lead surveyor that I'm learning from, and we're working together. And both of us are having this conversation and about needing new cars. He needs a new car. I need a new car. We're kind of like chit chatting. No, what are you going to buy? Where are you going to go and do this? Anyways, we went out on the same day, and I've told this story before. We went on the same day, and I bought, it was like a $2,500 beat up Pathfinder that could haul my tools, and that was it. Like, I just didn't want to go to jet. I didn't have a lot of money at that point. And he went out and he had spent, I think at that point it was like 60 grand it was like a new Volkswagen Jetta, I think was the car, something that he'd always wanted. And we showed up to work the next day. I was like, hey, I bought a new vehicle last night. He's like, really? So did I. And we're chatting about it. And he had told me that day, he's like, at some point you're going to have to grow up and buy a big boy car, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm just not there yet. Literally, it was that that same day, the end of that day, our foreman came and he said, "Hey, we're shutting things down.
Oh
Go
boy.
home." And he was
Yeah.
like, "Oh," and I wasn't, because he was, um, yeah, we sent all the material back. The
Oh
developers that were
man.
looking to build a hotel pulled the cash
Yep.
out of the build, and he went, and that was just, it was just a lesson of always like be aware. And I wasn't super aware of the market, but you know that something's kind of going on, and wait, hey, it didn't really feel right to spend money. And I went out, and it was just a lesson to like never overextend yourself
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
what was, would be considered a luxury item or something that you don't need
Right.
to have. But that was a real lesson. It was weird times. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well.
yeah, back to your story. So you're at that point, millions and millions of dollars are just like billions of dollars, and banks are just like, stop, things are dropping. And I imagine you're thinking, what the hell are we going to do here?
Hmm.
What does this look like?
Yeah.
But from that, in the way that, that all came together on my end, what that did was stem the idea and the drive of, okay, I need to do something here. I need to be a little more in control of the
Hmm.
situation. It was in 2010 that launched our company here that we're operating today.
Okay.
And so out of that time period, just like out of COVID, there's a
Yeah.
lot of silver linings when we thought,
Oh,
oh
for
man,
sure.
what are we going to be doing here? What are our clients going to be doing?
Yep.
There's so much chaos.
Yep.
But out of that, in my experience, in almost every part of my life, there's always some sort of silver lining and regrowth out of a catastrophe.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
yeah. So what happened from there?
Well, I would say, just to add on to your idea there, that I think all fortunes are built from those kinds of moments, right? Like somebody saw something in a moment or a problem and said, how can we solve that better? And from that, industries are born, companies are born, fortunes are built. Like that's what I was saying before. You feel the discomfort. The natural tendency is to turn and run away from it. If you can train yourself to turn and run toward it and to start getting curious about how to solve that or what's going on, you are setting yourself, like, that's the extra mile. That's that 1%. That's the difference making that really, I don't know if you can ever turn it into a habit. That it seems like it doesn't really just sit naturally. You always have to push, because naturally we're wired and built to avoid the discomfort, to avoid the pain and problems. But yeah, I think that's where all the opportunity comes from, is from those moments. And so in mine, I'm stubborn. I have kind of a thick skull and a hard head. And so again, my next lesson came from that chapter. And my hand was forced to, well, I felt it was forced. I had some attorneys tell me that as all the money was gone, and I started to try to piece together just what had happened, and these people that I had trusted that now appeared as though they were completely just like robbing me blind and broke. I started to look at some of the finances and things that I'd never paid attention to for 5 years. And it looks like there was a gross understatement of taxes and of income. And so they told me, well, you have two choices. The attorneys did, that I decided to go get some professional advice on my own. He said, door number one, you could go through and just pray that nobody ever looks at your tax returns, and just go quietly, don't make any noise, just slip off the radar. I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound good. What happens if I go through door number one and people do look, and they're like, well, you'll go to prison because your numbers were here. Your tax returns say the numbers were here, and we're talking about, it's missing some commas, man. It's missing a lot of zeros. So I was like, okay, here I am again looking at prison. I was looking at prison like 8 years ago, and I got these kids, and I got more kids. I got 4 of them now, and you're telling me this.
Congratulations. Yeah,
Okay.
never stop. I
So,
love it.
yeah. Now I'm like, well, is there another door? I said, yeah, door number 2 is you refile your taxes and you put the right numbers on there, and you do, like, you're going to have to go claw the data out of other people's hands. You're going to have to piece things together from banks that are no longer even in business, and you're going to have to try to create a picture of the money that you might actually owe in taxes. I'm like, but I don't know it. I don't even have it. Like,
Yeah, what are you talking about?
yeah. So I'm like, well, what does that look like if I finish that? And they're like, well, you're going to owe the IRS millions of dollars. And it turned out that it was about 5 million when all said and done. Now there were penalties, because now it's 5 years old. and there's interest that's now accruing and adding on to that. And interest on $5 million isn't fun. So it adds up pretty fast. On that kind of
Government wants their money, man. There's not a lot of ways around it. We had I was talking to Tony Hong previously. He's a CPA dude on Instagram, and he has a lot of fun stuff. I was asking him about what you can write off and this and that, and you can write off your swimming pool, can you write off your, I think we talked about the Netflix subscription, all that sort of stuff. The bottom line is like, man, if you don't have a good accountant and good finance team in place, or if you yourself are overcomplicating things, the government is going to find out one way or another.
Yeah.
They are going to want their money.
Yeah, and that's where taxes get really simple. When you owe them money, it's not complicated at all. They want it. They have all power to take it. So I refiled tax returns for the previous 5 years. I had a huge debt, and I began the process of trying to substantiate that I had none of the money from all those years. But they didn't. It's not like they said, oh, okay, you get a pass. They said, it's your name on the company. It's your name on the documents. It's your forged signature on the tax returns, but we don't even care about that. Like, you set up the company. You have the responsibility, and now you owe the tax dollars. So I spent 4.5 years. Again, the problems create these opportunities, and not that that was a great opportunity, but like I said, I'm a little stubborn, a little hard-headed. I needed to learn that head in the sand wasn't a strategy, that I needed to address things. I needed to deal with it. And so I spent 4.5 years going through litigation and piecing together the financial pictures and getting through that process, which I was able to do and kind of wind down to the point of settling for what I owed in taxes and getting the tax bill paid and finally having that monkey off my back.
Was it $5 million they ended up having to pay?
Yeah.
Oh, mama.
Yeah. It was significant.
It
wasn't that I didn't even get the pleasure of paying it because it was levied. I mean, I had so much of the government, like they were looking out my eyeballs. They were so far up my backside. I mean, so there was no money coming into my possession. It was intense. Not only was I fighting through this treacherous legal battle, but I was also dealing with the federal government and all the power that they have, and they had it all. So
we've had a couple of scenarios in our end, and where we've hired on companies to do work with us, and they send us an invoice, and then we get the government after us saying, "Hey, actually,
don't pay them.
We need you to pay us. If you pay them, then we are going to penalize you. We need to relinquish." Their wage, and then we have to have that conversation with this company saying, hey, we have either we're getting scammed, and this is a pretty good scam, but we're getting some pretty serious documents here saying that we have no choice but to pay these people.
Right.
And that's been an ugly conversation a couple of times in business. It won't be the last, but you never waste a good crisis. So what do? You make sure that you build systems for filtration and making sure that you're doing your due diligence. It's similar to, just before this, it was like, man, I had one episode where we had a audio issue. And so every time, like, cool, we just do a test recording every single time.
Right. And that's kind of out of the fruits of that crisis. The seeds of the next thing came up. And while I had all these accountants and lawyers and professionals working for me on that case, I had a friend of mine call and say, hey, I'm starting a new business. Don't you have guys that do like the payrolls kind of stuff? And I was like, well, I mean, I guess. So we helped her set up an entity and told her that we'd run payroll for her every 2 weeks. Well, she loved it because she got to just focus on the business and she didn't have to worry about all this other administrative stuff. She told 5 or 6 of her friends, and then they did the same thing. And within 1 year, inside of that year, we had 50 clients that we were doing books and payroll. And so that kind of grew by accident and just like a mistake. But I loved it because it gave me the opportunity to talk to other entrepreneurs like me whose strategy was often just put your head in the sand. I'm going to deal with those numbers later. Right now, I'm going to focus on this deal. Right now, I'm going to focus on this. So that carried on for several years. And then just last year, I exited out of the bookkeeping and the admin side mostly. We've kept a couple clients that they just refused to go. but almost everything that I do now is just on the consulting and the coaching side, which is what I love to do, is using all these crazy experiences and stories and chapters of my life that I've been wrung through the ringer and say, hey, don't do it that way. There's a better way. And here's some systems and some playbooks that you can put in place for you today that will save you a year, that will save you $10,000, that will save you 60 hours with that new hire or whatever it is. And that's what we do now.
I believe big in coaching, right? You could the best way to learn to where you're going to find your way up the mountain is to talk to those that are on their way back down.
Yeah,
right.
100%.
What would you tell somebody that would be on the fence of maybe hiring a coach? They know that they need to, but they're not sure that they should make the investment. Maybe it's a lot of money for them, but what would you tell that person?
Always write the check for speed. Like if you feel that you can get a result faster because of that person coming down the mountain, like the costs they add exponentially. And just look at my stories. I mean, I lost tens of millions of dollars. I was facing prison time possible. Like it's just not worth it. And so if there's something that's holding you back from that, and that's kind of my message, is whether you're an alcoholic and you're not really sure how to deal with it, and you're just terrified by the idea of actually going and getting real serious help, or whether you're in a business and you feel like you're just getting your ass kicked day after day, there's something that's holding you back from moving forward. And at the bottom of like all this crap that you're putting in between there, it's just some fear. And it's not real. And there's 99 out of 100 of the things you're scared of are not real. So if you just give it a try, you go into it, you find somebody, you do your due diligence, do your thing, but don't get caught making a decision for 90 days. You know, if there's something that you know that you're lacking, if there's expertise that you know could help you advance quicker, do it. You will always, I probably paid $5 million in the last 15 years to coaching and consulting. Like,
and to the government for that matter.
yeah. And then there's that too. That
Much
one
rather,
I don't really feel like I got a good ROI on, but you know, yeah. So I think, and I continue to do that today. Like I will always do those things that give me, because especially as the boss, you know, entrepreneurs are often in the boss role, and so they have a lot of people coming to them for answers. And that gets you at a weird headspace to where you don't always see things as clearly. So you got to have colleagues, you got to have peers, you got to have mentors and advisors that can call you out, that can point out some traits that don't have a vested interest in you, not just partners, not just, you know, because there's friction sometimes with some of those relationships. Disinterested third parties that are just there to shoot you straight, just to give it to you like right on, like, hey man, you're doing this and it's dumb and you need to do this instead because then you'll get out of your own way. It's like, yeah, that's okay. That's a good idea. You need to have Dr. Bob's, you know, we all got to have them. Without them, life is harder. Business is harder. So you don't need to give up the farm. You don't need to trade your birthright away for any, you know, you don't got to give up half your company. Just hire a coach, hire somebody. And then read a book
and get around.
Find a new coach. You know, like just keep the process going.
I think, books for those that are maybe in a position that maybe they're not business owners. Maybe they're looking at doing something great, and books are cheap.
Yeah,
like community. Absolutely. There's a lot of free communities out there that you can get involved in, and if you get around some great people, they are going to change your life.
Yeah, and that's what I would say as we kind of bring this, you know, to start wrapping things up, Brandon. I think this idea of you'll never achieve that which you don't believe you can, like never. And if you're not putting some of your effort back, you know, I've been getting a lot of clients into our coaching business lately that are in the trades, you know, so they start out because they're a good plumber or a good electrician or an HVAC company or, you know, one of these. And they know how to plumb, they know how to wire, they know how to run ducts and have heating and air conditioning and all this stuff. But that's once they hit this first level and they start to bump their head on the ceiling, it's when those skills are no longer what the business needs to go to the next level. The next level, the skills are human resource management. You got to learn how to deal with people better, or number management. You got to learn how to read a financial statement, or tax strategy, because you're losing your ass when it comes to the end of the year and you didn't think about a strategy. You know, like The bottom line is it's looking back at yourself. You have to make a better version of yourself next year than you had this year. And if you do that, you'll be bringing good people in to work with you. You'll be bringing good coaches in to work with you. You'll be reading good books. And as you elevate yourself, every entrepreneur out there, if you've got the balls to start a business and go out there into the market and risk it all, you'll solve the problems. But if you're not doing things that pour back into yourself to give yourself an edge, you're going to find yourself in this comfort zone. You're going to keep the thermostat dialed in at a certain level, and you'll go up until you come back down, and you'll find some of my clients have been doing that for 25 years with a margin of revenue that's the same $100,000 range. Some of them are going 100 to 200,000. Some of them are going 3.5 million to 3.6 million. But they're staying in that range because they're comfy there. So pour into yourself. Do things that help you move your own needle, and you have the wherewithal to solve all the problems that are there. But you don't need to be a CPA to read a financial statement or to start thinking about your numbers. You don't got to go to college and get a master's degree. No, just meet with your CPA quarterly.
You don't need to, and you probably shouldn't.
No,
you should probably be focusing on the things that you're good at, and making sure that you get good at that human thing.
Excellent.
You're going to find those people that are going to be able to do a great job.
Absolutely.
Justin, man, thank you so much for being here. It was whirlwind. Really appreciate you sharing your story. Where can people find you?
Probably Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. We're on all the social platforms. That's the easiest place. We have a website, propelyour.com. But find me online. Come and connect with me. If there's anything that I can do to help you, if any of our playbooks for us or any of our clients, whether you are hiring somebody or you need to find a CPA or anything like that, like just message us. Our whole library of anything is available to you. Just that's what we want to do. We want to put all that goodwill out there so you're not trying to reinvent the wheel.
My man, thank you so much. And for all you listeners that are out there and still with us, thank you very much for all of your time today. And until next time, peace. Rock and roll. See ya.